Perfect. We're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday. We are excited to be hosting the Flashtract Unconditional Waiver Vault webinar today. For those of you that just joined, you don't need your microphone or web camera for today, as long as you have your computer audio set up so you can hear my voice and see my computer screen, then you should be all set. We have the Q&A turned on, so at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see an area to submit questions. So feel free to submit those throughout today's webinar. So to get started, the panelist for today's webinar is myself, Ben Conry, head of product here at Flashtract. And then my colleague, Angela Ochoa. She's a product manager here at Flashtract. And she was a major contributor and owner of this feature, the Unconditional Waiver Vault. So she'll be answering questions at the tail end of today's webinar. She is all things payments and unconditional waivers here at Flashtract. So if you have any questions about that, she'll be happy to answer those throughout today's webinar and at the tail end. So just to kind of give you a high-level overview of the agenda for the things that we'll be covering today, we'll be discussing the challenges with unconditionals in the construction industry. We'll be talking about the benefits of our new feature, the Unconditional Waiver Vault. We'll give you an overview on how the feature works. We'll walk through a process flow so you can understand the different ways to configure this product or feature, as well as a live product demo. So you'll be able to see the Unconditional Vault in action from both your perspective as a general contractor as well as a subcontractor's perspective. We'll then round out the webinar today with a Q&A session. So like I said, feel free to submit any questions. Angela will be monitoring that today, and she'll jump in and come off mute if we have any questions that we need to answer in real time. If not, we'll just be answering the majority of those questions at the tail end of today's webinar. So to start off with the unconditional waiver challenges that many contractors face in the construction industry. So here at Flashtract, we went out to our customer base and started talking to as many people as we could about unconditional waivers, their process, how they collected them from subcontractors, how they reviewed them, how they tracked to see if they had received them. We also talked to the market as a whole, just to better understand what are different tools or processes that general contractors use to facilitate this process. And through these conversations and interviews, we kind of consolidated the challenges into kind of four major components. One is a lot of general contractors today are filling out unconditional waivers for their subcontractors. So when it's time to pay their subcontractors, they go in, maybe their ERP system can generate an unconditional waiver. Maybe they're filling it out in Word. They're having to populate the project name, the payment amount, and they're either emailing that to a subcontractor to get signed, or they're stuffing it in an envelope with a check and mailing it to a subcontractor. But it's a very manual process that's time consuming to fill out these waivers for subcontractors. Next, when we talk to general contractors, they just continue to emphasize one of their biggest challenges was just trailing down these unconditional waivers. Each and every month, it was the same challenge. They would send out unconditional waivers to get signed by their subcontractors. A lot of the subcontractors would return them, but there would be a few that would be slow to sign and resubmit these unconditional waivers. And this has big impacts. Typically, maybe project owners or developers require us as general contractors to submit these unconditional waivers on future billings in order for them to process our billing to them. So this is slowing down cash flow to us by having these lien waivers we're having to trail down. Not only is it's also adding risk to our business by not having these unconditional waivers on file. So if we're lucky enough to fill out these waivers and get them sent to the subcontractor and actually get them submitted, we're also a lot of times having to review these waivers for accuracy. We all know these are, legal documents. the project's got to be correct, the owner's got to be correct, the payment due amount's got to be correct. All of this information needs to be rock solid in order for these waivers to hold up. So a lot of us are either not reviewing these waivers, which is opening your company up to risk, or you are reviewing these waivers, which is a very tedious process for our teams. Lastly, general contractors, when we kind of talk to the market and our customers as a whole, they were tracking these unconditional waivers, and if they had received them back from the subcontractor through Excel spreadsheets, sending emails, this information can easily get out of date. You can mischeck a box, and it's hard to keep track of these through old systems like Excel or Google Sheets or our email inbox. It can become quite confusing and cluttered quite quickly. So as a whole, the current process is inefficient for most general contractors. It introduces risk to the business if we're not tediously reviewing these and getting these returned back on time. And it also strains relationships with our subcontractors. We're constantly having to hound them to get these unconditional waivers submitted so that we can get paid by our owner, so that we can pay them. And there's just constant confusion across the stakeholders on projects for why their payment is delayed. And a lot of times it's because an unconditional waiver hasn't been submitted. So we're going to try to bring a solution to the market that will make you much more efficient in collecting unconditional waivers, reduce risk for your company, and ensure that you have strong relationships with your subcontractors and can get them paid in a timely manner. So the benefits of our new feature, the Unconditional Waiver Vault, is we're going to accurately generate unconditional waivers. So we store a lot of important information on our system, such as the project name, project owner, job address, invoice amounts. So we'll be able to take this critical data and populate these unconditional waivers for your subcontractors. We're also going to be able to enforce the collection of these unconditional waivers at the time of invoice submission. And a lot of you are probably scratching your head. You're like, that's not how we do it today. We typically collect these unconditional waivers before we pay our subcontractors or right after we pay our subcontractors. What is this you're talking about collecting when they submit an invoice? Well, what we have here is we've created some awesome technology. We call it the Vault, where we're actually able to store these official signed unconditional waivers into escrow until that subcontractor has either been paid via ACH payment through Flashtract or has verified receipt of payment. So this is going to provide a way for your subcontractors to securely sign these unconditional waivers upfront when they go to submit an invoice, but you as the general contractor will not have access to the official copy until they have actually received payment. So it's going to provide for a more seamless exchange of funds and documents. We're also going to provide automated tracking. You'll be able to report on this information, see where the unconditional waiver is in the process. Has it been released from escrow? Is it still in escrow? And you can see this in a matter of 2 clicks in our system. And as I alluded to earlier, we're going to be exchanging unconditional waivers seamlessly with payment, which is what we all try to do through our current processes of sending emails right before we send a check out the door or stuffing the unconditional waiver in an envelope when we mail the check. But through technology, we're going to provide for a much more streamlined, seamless experience for exchanging these two critical kind of pieces, which is payment with the unconditional waiver. So to kind of give you an overview, and this is very high level. So at a 30,000 foot level, how does the Unconditional Waiver Vault feature work in Flashtract? Well, it can be summarized in 4 major bullet points. We're going to collect unconditional waivers from your subcontractors at time of invoice submission. We're going to have all of the critical information needed to populate that unconditional waiver. So we're going to fill out that unconditional waiver for your subcontractor. They will sign it, and it will immediately turn into an unofficial copy. The official copy will actually get placed in our secure waiver vault. So this is where our unconditional waiver will be held until the subcontractor has received payment or has verified receipt of payment if you're not using Flashtract's ACH functionality. After you have paid your subcontractor using payments through Flashtract, or have marked an invoice as paid in Flashtract, we will notify the subcontractor that payment's on its way. They will log into Flashtract, verify receipt of payment, and the official copy of the unconditional waiver will be made available to all parties. So this is a great feature. You'll be able to see the unofficial copy, see that it was populated correctly, but that official signed document we're going to hold securely in our vault to make sure that your subcontractors feel comfortable signing this waiver up front. So going through a process flow, I know this diagram is a little busy at first, but I'm going to try to break it down so that we all kind of have a basic understanding on how this works before we get into a demo. So to start out, as a general contractor, for any of our users that are on the webinar today, this will probably make a ton of sense, but you will set up the unconditional waiver as a billing requirement template. So for those of you that aren't Flashtract customers, this is where in Flashtract you can go in and you can build a checklist of requirements that you would like to collect from your subcontractors with each invoice. So common billing requirements collected through Flashtract today are a payment application, a partial conditional lien waiver, a final conditional lien waiver. Some general contractors today use it to collect, stored material backup if the subcontractor is billing for stored material. But today you would now set up a unconditional waiver, both partial and final, as a billing requirement. So now what happens is your subcontractor does what they normally do. They log into Flashtract, submit their invoice like usual. But at this point in time, we're not only going to generate that pay application and that conditional lien waiver, we're also going to generate that unconditional lien waiver. That subcontractor is going to be prompted to sign that unconditional lien waiver. I'll show you that today. We make it super clear that the official copy of that waiver is not going to be made available to the GC until they have been paid. And after they sign that unconditional waiver, what's going to happen is both the subcontractor and the general contractor are going to both have access to that unofficial copy of the unconditional waiver. So this allows the subcontractor to view it, the general contractor to review it and make sure it's been populated correctly, but the official copy is going to be held in our vault. So it's going to be held in our vault until one of two conditions are met. So we're going to go ahead and move back up here to the general contractor side of things. And here are the two conditions. Condition A, if you're a general contractor using ACH payments through Flashtract today, you just pay your subcontractor through Flashtract using ACH payment. And Flashtract's actually going to get a response from the subcontractor's bank, letting us know once those funds have cleared, meaning once those funds are available to your subcontractor. When we receive that response from your subcontractor's bank, we're going to make that unofficial unconditional waiver now become an official unconditional waiver. We will release the official unconditional waiver from our vault, so all parties will have access. Benefit of this process, there's no more waiting on your subcontractor to do anything to get access to an unconditional waiver. If you pay them through Flashtract, you are guaranteed to get an unconditional waiver as soon as those funds clear. But, some of you on today's call are Flashtract customers, some are not. You might be comfortable with how you pay subcontractors today, and you still want to leverage this feature. We took this into account and built a second condition. So for condition B in Flashtract, you would simply just mark an invoice as paid, meaning that you are about to pay or have just paid your subcontractor. We're going to send an email to the subcontractor letting them know that payment is on the way or has been sent, and the subcontractor will be queued to log into their Flashtract account and acknowledge receipt of payment once they've received it from you. So if you're still using paper checks, you would mail the check, mark it as paid. Subcontractor would verify receipt of that check once it gets delivered, and the official waiver becomes available. So you can see here, condition B, still streamlined. Subcontractor is verifying payment in one click. They're not having to sign an unconditional waiver and notarize it and fill it out correctly. We already have the official copy. We just need them to verify receipt of payment so we can release it from our vault. If you're using ACH payments, you click that button to pay them, wait about 2 days, and the unconditional waiver will be available once we get the response from the subcontractor's bank that payments have cleared. So I know we've thrown a lot at you so far with the challenges of unconditional waivers for contractors in the construction industry, the benefits, and an overview on how our unconditional vault works, as well as a process flow. So at this point in time, we're actually going to jump into the product and actually show you how this thing works. So starting out, I am logged in right now as a general contractor. So for our users on today's webinar, you're familiar with this. This is your dashboard. This is where you're able to see all of the active projects that you're currently working on. So if I drill down inside a job, let's say the Four Seasons Hotel, I can see a list of all of my subcontracts that I'm currently managing. If I click inside a subcontract, I can see all of the relevant contract terms, the original contract amount, any change orders that have been issued, balance to finish, etc. Down here at the bottom, we see the subcontractor's schedule values, which is their itemized breakout of their contract. Right here, ties out perfectly to their contract amount, as well as our vendor that's been assigned, and we're about to invite them. Before I invite my subcontractor, I'm going to come over here to the view billing requirements. So right now, you can see for this particular project, I've set up 5 billing requirements. So as I talked about earlier, in Flashtract, you can build that custom billing checklist that your subcontractors have to follow. Most of our customers today, you've been using the partial conditional waiver, the final conditional waiver, and the Flashtract standard payment application. But what we've done in this use case is we've gone ahead and added the partial unconditional waiver as a billing requirement, as well as the final unconditional waiver. So Flashtract is smart enough to know if this is an unconditional waiver, this is a document that needs to follow our vault flow or vault process. So you don't have to do any additional configuration on your side. If you go in today, search under billing requirement templates, you'll be able to see a list of statutory unconditional waivers, templates that you can use, as well as if you have any unconditional waiver templates based on the location that you're working, your company, an owner requirement, we can accommodate any sort of custom unconditional waiver template. So just email that into us. We can get that added. And you also have the ability to configure these documents to be wet signed or electronically signed. So I'll be showing you the electronic signature flow today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite my subcontractor to this particular project and subcontract and take you through their submission workflow. So I'm going to log out. I'm going to log back in now as the subcontractor. And when I do, on my Flashtract dashboard as a subcontractor, I can see I've just gotten invited to the Four Seasons Hotel project by my general contractor. When I click inside that project, I can see the contract is pending my acceptance. I'll click on that contract. I can review the contract terms. I can review the schedule values that has been set up for me. I'll accept those terms, and now I'll get started submitting my invoice. So at this point in time, subcontractor can key in a dollar value into the this period column. If they're billing for stored material, they can invoice for that. Or if they just want to key in a progress percentage, we'll back into the dollar value for them. After the subcontractor has keyed in the billing values, they'll save their changes. And then right now, you're going to see that they're going to get a notification that says they cannot submit their bill when their insurance is expired or not compliant. So right now, the subcontractor's compliance status is not compliant because we don't have general liability insurance from them for this job. So I'm just going to go through the process of showing you how compliance works in Flashtract as well as part of the subcontractor submission process. So subcontractor comes in, selects their certificate of insurance they would like to upload. They can key in a effective date. They can choose a expiration date. And they can also type in an issue date. After they've put in that information, they'll save their changes. And now you can see the insurance requirement is now changed to pending review. So they're not compliant yet. It still needs to be reviewed by your team. But it's now been successfully submitted, so the subcontractor can move forward with submitting their bill. So at this point in time, the general contractor account that I'm using has second tier vendor management tracking turned on. So at this point in time, your subcontractor will be taken to this screen where they'll be asked to list out any lower tier subcontractors or suppliers that they're working with. From the screen, you can require them to upload waivers from these lower tier contractors. But for today, I'm going to say that I'm not working with any suppliers. They're going to have to acknowledge just via this affidavit modal that this information is accurate. We'll store when they acknowledge this affidavit, and we'll take them to the review document screen. So this is kind of Flashtrack secret sauce. So at this point in time, we will generate the payment application. Subcontractor will electronically sign that using their unique 4-digit PIN. We'll generate the partial conditional lien waiver. They will sign that document. And then here's an example of a partial unconditional waiver that's leveraging our Vault technology. So you can see here, we're still generating this unconditional waiver just like we do with the conditional lien waiver, but we're actually placing an unofficial watermark on this copy. So your subcontractors are being notified that, hey, this document will remain locked in a secure vault until payment has been verified. The general contractor and owner will not have access until payment has been made or been verified. They can actually click here. They can learn more. But from a subcontractor's perspective, they sign the unconditional waiver. They can see that it's being held in a secure vault, and they submit their payout. So now that they have successfully submitted their invoice through Flashtract, what you'll notice is on their side screen, the partial unconditional waiver is still locked. If they hover over it, you can see we're providing additional information that this is going to remain locked until the general contractor has paid you or you have verified receipt of payment. The watermark is still placed on this unofficial copy, and the official copy of the document is being held in our secure vault. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log out and log back in as the general contractor to kind of take you through your process for retrieving back an official copy. So logging in as the general contractor on my Flashtrack dashboard, I can see on my Four Seasons hotel job that there's a invoice pending my approval. When I click inside that job, there's a $2,800 invoice submitted by Roberts Builders. I can review the schedule of values, and up here in our billing requirements, if I click on my partial conditional, it's showing as usual. It's just a normal conditional lien waiver. But from the general contractor side, if they click on the unconditional waiver, sub hasn't been paid yet, sub hasn't verified receipt of payment, it's still watermarked. So I'm going to go ahead, approve this invoice, and move on to the next step. So let's imagine that fast forward in time, 30 days, you've now been funded by the owner of the project for this particular pay period, and you're ready to start paying your subcontractors. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through Flashtrack's payment management workflow and show you how you can use this workflow to either release ACH payment if you want to use our payment functionality. If you don't want to use our ACH payment functionality, you can still mark an invoice as paid, which is going to ask that subcontractor to go in and verify payment. So fast forward in time, we've been funded on this job by the owner. So I'll come in here, search for my Four Seasons project, and I'm currently logged in as an accountant. So the accountant role, it's quite simple. All they need to do, search for the job and the pay period, select ready to pay, and that's going to take any invoices that were billed during this pay period on this job and push them over to our invoices dashboard. So from the invoices dashboard, we have a new role that you can assign to a project manager, a project accountant, or this can be owned by the same person. What they can do is search for the job, Four Seasons Hotel, find the invoice that needs their review. They mark it as ready to pay. And now we're on to our last step. This is the issuance step. So in Flashtrack, if you're using ACH payment, you would have an issuer. The issuer is responsible for coming in, and they can actually release payment to any subcontractor that is in a ready-to-pay status. They won't be able to pay anyone that still needs approval from a project manager or project accountant. Right here on our payments dashboard, we can see the unconditional waiver is still locked. So then issuer would be able to come in here, select an invoice, click issue ACH payment. They can see the payment amount that we're about to send to our subcontractor, Roberts Builders, as well as any invoice information. So an invoice ID, a payment amount, project, and then the status. So I'll come in here, click release ACH payment, and now our payment transfer has successfully been initiated. So now, this is the amazing part about the vault. Sit back. As soon as these funds hit your subcontractor's bank account, it's going to notify Flashtract, and we're going to immediately make the unconditional waiver available to you. So I actually paid a subcontractor invoice earlier this week on my Hilton Riverside job. So if I come into my site work subcontract, I can see that my partial unconditional waiver has now been unlocked. It's no longer in our vault. If we click on that unconditional waiver, the watermark's been removed, and you now have access to that unconditional waiver. So some of you are on this webinar right now saying, that looks awesome, but today we're not using Flashtract for payments yet. We just want to figure out how we can still use this feature without using ACH payments. So what I'm going to do is show you the same workflow, but if you're not using payments with Flashtract. So one second. If we come into our payments tab right here, I have another job that I got an invoice for earlier this week. That is the Truist Tower job. So I'll search for Truist Tower, mark the project and pay period as funded, find the invoice that I want to send the unconditional waiver for, mark it as ready to pay, select the invoice, mark as paid. So what that's going to do is that's going to send an email notification to your subcontractor letting them know, hey, payment is on its way. And your subcontractor would easily be able to log into their Flashtract account. And when they do, they'll be pushed to our verify payment screen. They can see their contract, the pay period, and the amount that payment is that you're asking them to verify payment for. They can click on the waiver. They can see it's still unofficial. They can verify payment here directly from this screen, or they can verify payment. They type in their 4-digit PIN, payment's been verified, and now general contractor has access to that official copy of the unconditional waiver. So let's log back in as a general contractor. And as I do, I'm going to show you on that Truist Tower job that the unconditional waiver would be released at this point in time once the subcontractor has verified receipt of payment. So in Flashtract today, you also have multiple ways to view these unconditional waivers. With our reporting tool, you can come in and actually create a compiled document report. You can select a project and a pay period, and then you would just select the unconditional waiver as the document that you want to include in the report. And we create a nice combined PDF of all of the unconditional waivers on that project from that pay period that you could maybe include as backup to your owner on an additional follow-up bill. So coming back to the dashboard, kind of what I've shown you so far is how a subcontractor can submit an invoice, how that invoice can be approved, and then I've shown you both the issue ACH flow, which makes the unconditional waiver available automatically, as well as the mark as paid flow, which would require the subcontractor to verify receipt of payment. So I'm going to flip back over to my deck and now open up the floor to Q&A time. So I know we've covered a lot. There's a lot of intricacies that we covered, but if you have any questions, please submit them at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A area, and we're going to start taking a look at those right now. So I had a question get submitted, and it says, what if we pay some subcontractors with ACH and others with paper check? That's an awesome question. So I'm going to give you the answer for today, and then I'm going to give you the answer for probably my recommendation for a couple months from now. So today in Flashtract, you would be able to select the default payment method for each vendor. So if you have 100 vendors and you have 80 that accept ACH, you would just set that default payment method to ACH and the other 20 to check, and you'd be able to pay those 80 subcontractors via ACH. And then for the 20 that accept check, you would just use that mark as paid flow, issue them a check, and they would go in and verify payment. Here in a couple months, we're actually rolling out an additional payment method that we're really excited about. Angela is owning that as well. But what we'll be able to do is, if you are paying some subcontractors via check, we are actually going to be able to provide a check printing and mailing service. So you could just click pay, and we would not only issue ACH payments to subcontractors, but we would also actually print and mail checks on your behalf to your subcontractors if you would like to fully offload payments to subcontractors and get that kind of off your plate. So short answer is you would select the default payment method for each vendor, pay some via ACH, use that flow for them, and the ones that you use check for, you would do the mark as paid flow. So hopefully that's helpful, but feel free to submit another question if that's not helpful. So I had another question come in asking about the current unconditional functionality that we have today. And would they be able to, let's see, visit each job, each sub, each pay period to use this functionality? So yeah, that's a good question. So right now today, the current functionality is going to be supported for a little bit more time before we migrate all of our users over to this new Unconditional Vault functionality. But the question about each job, each pay period, and each vendor, a lot of which I showed you today was very granular. I showed you one job, one invoice with one subcontractor, but most of these processes that I showed you can be done in bulk. So you can select multiple jobs as funded or ready to be paid. You can select multiple invoices as mark as paid. So there's batch functionality that should really cut down on any excessive amount of time it takes to to do that process. But right now today, existing functionality is staying. We're rolling out an exception flow, and once that exception flow is live, that's when we'll be sunsetting the existing functionality to get everything digital and inside of Flashtract. I had a question come in about how will payment data flow to ERP. That's a good question. So today, depending upon which ERP system you're using, we're currently working on adding payment data to several of our existing integrations today. So it depends on which ERP you're using for if we can actually push this information directly back to the ERP via an API. For an ERP that we don't integrate with, we generate a remittance file with a list of all of the invoices that have been paid that you can use to update your accounting system. If you have questions about which ERPs we do support for the payment data, you can just reach out to Skylar Gessinger here at the bottom, and he can let you know which ones we support. Yeah, so we got another good question. Any concerns from subcontractors about submitting unconditional lien waivers before payment? Yeah, that's a good question. So right now today, what we came up with the Unconditional Vault is we wanted to create a frictionless process that was secure and easy to use for both your subcontractors and the general contractor. Current process today of sending an unconditional waiver with a check and having to call the subcontractor and ask them to resubmit it is challenging for both you and the subcontractor. So we believe that this new escrow functionality that we've built with the Unconditional Vault is both safe and secure for you and your subcontractor. Us as a third party are providing that escrow service. So we have documentation we can provide to your subcontractors to make them feel confident that signing the unconditional waiver before getting paid, that you as the general contractor won't have access. But we've gone ahead and gone a step further in that, let's imagine you work with 100 subcontractors and 98% of them are like, yeah, this is great. It's easier for me. It's easier for you. I trust you. Let's do it. But let's imagine that there's 2 subcontractors that just refuse to use the vault. We are building an exception flow, which will allow you to not require the subcontractor to sign the unconditional waiver when they go to submit an invoice. And then once you mark an invoice as paid in Flashtract, we would send an unconditional waiver to your subcontractor for them to sign after the fact. It adds some steps for the subcontractor. So that's why we say that's the non-recommended workflow. But in the use case that they just straight up are unwilling to do it, we do have a workflow to accommodate your use case. So I answered that one live. We got some more coming in. What happens if an unconditional final has been issued? We mail a check and the sub refuses to acknowledge receipt of payment. Yeah, good question. So today through Flashtract, one of the pieces of functionality that we'll be adding to this existing feature is we'll be able to provide additional holds across other projects if there's an outstanding payment that hasn't been verified. So as long as that subcontractor is working on another job with you, we can help ensure that they're actually going to verify that receipt of payment inside of Flashtract. That's not live yet. It's an enhancement that we're adding. Angela, is there anything you want to add to that, or do you think that's a good summary?
I think that's a good summary.
Awesome. So we have another question come in. It says, is the exception flow by vendor or project? So you pick. You can do either one. You can set up the exception flow to be a specific configuration for a specific vendor, or if you would prefer, you can set that exception flow across an entire job. So you have those levers built in where you can say, hey, I want to use the exception flow on this entire job, or I want to use this exception flow with this specific vendor. We had another question come in around email notifications. Angela, do you see that one, and could you take that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we are going to, once the subcontractor verifies the receipt payment, we are going to send you as a GCA notification letting you know that the document is official now. We are not sending it via email because you can, as Ben mentioned before, you can generate the document using the report, or also you can go to the contract overview page and take a look from there, or also from the invoices dashboard that we provide for payments, you can also get a copy of the document from there. So there are like at least 3 places on the app that you can take, download the document if required.
Yeah, but it's a good question about notifications to the general contractor. So yes, the subcontractor gets notified once they've been paid. If you're using ACH, they'll also get notified via email if you mark it as paid. And then that workflow, the general contractor does receive an email notification once it's been verified by the subcontractor. Lots of good questions. We've worked our way through a lot, but feel free to continue to submit any questions. And as we wait on more questions to come in, one of the things I just wanted to call out is, as always here at Flashtract, we love feedback from our users. So as you start using this feature functionality, if you have feedback for us, inside of your Flashtract account, just go to the Help Center and click the product feedback, suggest a feature, or this is just a general feedback request form. Let us know what problem you're facing, why does it matter to your team, and the importance. And Angela will be reviewing feedback related to the Unconditional Vault on a weekly basis. So feel free to submit feedback. Yeah, so we had a question come in around how compliance works with payment. So when I read that, I'm taking that like, how does compliance with the umbrella of like insurance work with payment? So with Flashtract today, you have the ability to set up compliance requirements on a per vendor, per job basis. So let's imagine you need to collect general liability, auto liability, umbrella, workers' comp, and maybe a W-9 from a subcontractor. You can set up those requirements in Flashtract. Your subcontractor, your subcontractor will be required to upload those insurance requirements before they submit an invoice, and we'll also ask for that expiration date on those documents. So Flashtract will allow your team to review those insurance certificates. There's like an approval workflow. You can decline them and send them back to the subcontractor. But once you've marked a requirement as compliant or approved, we'll actually track that expiration date for you on the insurance certificate. So if a insurance document is coming up on expiration 30 days before it expires, we'll send a email notification to the subcontractor and to your compliance officer in Flashtract, letting them know that, hey, this document's about to expire. And then once it's actually expired, we'll send a notification too. But how does it tie into payments? That's kind of the question that was asked. So with Flashtract, we have a compliance status column right here. So you can see 3 different statuses. Green means good, they're compliant, everything's up to date. Red means not compliant. Yellow means something's pending your team's review. If it's red, that could also mean something's expired. You can hover over these compliance items and see the specific requirement. And then there's a question that you said, can payment be held automatically if expired? That is something that we don't do automatically today. Right now today, we kind of as part of the payment approval process, typically we would have maybe someone from the risk team as part of the invoice approval or payment approval process, where they wouldn't approve an invoice to be paid if the compliance document is expired. But we do have a enhancement coming out later on that would put an automatic hold if the subcontractor has expired insurance. So if that's something you're interested in leveraging, just let us know. If you're a Flashtract user, submit it through the help center, or if you're not a Flashtract user and that's something that's a big challenge for you, just reach out to Skylar, and we would love to learn more about that use case. Well, it looks like we're not having any more questions come in. If you do have a question, feel free to continue to submit. But for any Flashtract users on the webinar today, if this is something that you would like to start leveraging today, please email Skylar Gessinger at flashtract.com. Email's right here, and let him know that you're interested. We're happy to work through your particular use case and figure out how you'll be using this feature. If you're not a customer of Flashtract or a user of Flashtract yet, we thank you for coming. If this seemed interesting, seemed like something that could solve your company's current challenges around unconditional waivers and your subcontractors, and finding a more secure and seamless way to exchange payment and waivers with your subcontractors, we'd love to meet you, talk about your problems or challenges, and figure out if Flashtract could help. So thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. And as I said, as always, feel free to submit feedback. We want to hear from our customers. We want to know how we can continue to make this feature better. So thank you for coming today, and we'll talk soon.